Hi all, everybody hear me okay, Karen? Am I coming through?
Yes, you are coming through. Ben, why don't you go ahead? We had some introductory, but evidently David Kelly is not with us. So please go ahead and start your presentation.
Thanks, Karen. I'm sure David will be more than welcome to join us at the end and do the intro then. Always welcome to have David. Welcome everybody. Do join in on the chat on the right hand side. As Karen said, my name's Ben Betts. I'm the CEO at a company called Learning Pool, based out of the UK. Company is international, as I'll talk about today. I'm going to talk to you about sort of lessons in scale from an xAPI implementation, or at least a learning ecosystem implementation that bent heavy on the xAPI that we spent about a year doing last year. And really, this is, I don't know, I'm not the most technical person in the world, so if you were hoping for a deep dive tech session, you're welcome to have 20 minutes back on that one. But it is an interesting case study in terms of some of the issues that we faced using xAPI at a kind of global scale, and what we did to overcome some of those, and where we take those next. So I'm very happy to be here. I've been in and around the Experience API since pretty close to the start. I worked with a colleague of mine called Dave Tosh to create Learning Locker, which was a learning record store, which some of you may have come across and may still be in use today. Today, we know it internally as Stream Data Cloud as we move things around, but that's the hallmark of my experience in the xAPI sort of area. I know the cohort from days gone by, and I know it's always been a hugely useful forum for folks to get to know, to share, to network, and to build up that knowledge. So welcome. I hope you're having a good time here in the second week. Without any further ado, we'll kick into a slideshow for you. Like I said, do keep the chat coming, and go from there. Learning Locker is still around. It is still around, David. It is very much still available for you in an open source license, and we tend to deal mostly in the enterprise side of it today. But yeah, still very well used. So, a bit about me. I've already given you that, so I guess I'll go past this slide. But like I say, I've been in e-learning for 20 years, and xAPI has been a major part of that, and been a major part of what's enabled some of the businesses that I've been involved in to be successful. So I've had the real privilege of watching this grow up a little bit, and had the opportunity to help implement and be a part of projects all over the world that have used xAPI at significant scale. My company today is Learning Pool. We have 9 going on 10 offices around the world. We employ nearly 500 people. We are an end-to-end provider of learning technology. So we have a complete stack of tech from LXP to LRS. We do content and services, and we work with mostly large global organizations to solve some of the thorniest problems that they have in developing and designing e-learning for large global audiences. So we work in 42 languages across 30 countries. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a project. I won't name the client at this point, so forgive me for saying the word client a bunch. And if I slip up, then pretend like you didn't hear it. They will be anonymous, but they are a quick service restaurant of significant scale. So we were contracted to provide a new learning ecosystem to this organization. They have about 850,000 employees at any given moment in time, and a high level of turnover as well, as you would with any quick service restaurant. So huge numbers of employees, and actually the company encompasses a range of brands that operate relatively autonomously, apart from having centralized provision around learning. So 7 sub organizations. There was a challenge that they wanted to replace their previous LMS system. The brands operate with big levels of autonomy. So it isn't just a case of kind of having a learning management system that's kind of looks like this brand or looks like that brand. They wanted to change everything about the user experience. A lot of the content might be the same because it's kind of mandated from central that you will do this content in this sort of sequence. But there's lots of complexity into that. So there can be lots of nuances about equivalences from different places, different countries to different territories. And there's even the opportunity for these brands to use their own interfaces completely. So sometimes they wanted to use a platform that was being provisioned centrally, which was what my company, Learning Pool, was tasked to do. But they also sometimes had their own front ends. That could have been a mobile device, as well as something that was accessible through the browser. So we had to provide an ecosystem that would unify all of these things. It would give an interface that folks would use it as a learning experience platform, who were just using it centrally, as well as APIs that were open for all of these other brands to create their own interfaces. Now, all of that would also have to interact with lots of different types of content. So many brands using many different systems. Some of them using Storyline and Rise, some of them using Adapt, which is again a tool from Learning Pool, and many other flavors of content within that. Having the data in a single source was incredibly important to the organization. When you're running a global organization across lots of different brands, being able to have a standardized experience so that I walk into a branch of the restaurant in Malaysia and I have a very similar experience to what I do in Kentucky is entirely the sort of experience that you're looking to deliver here. Part of that is making sure that folks go through mandatory as well as essential training and be badged, credentialed to know that they got to the standard. And those credential paths can be quite different depending on the territories and depending on the legal requirements, but they still need to audit from the central level whether people have met the basic standards, even if those standards are different. So what we're looking to do here is to have many interfaces with many different types of content, all reporting back to a single place. That single place is going to be the learning record store. And of course, this is where the Experience API comes in. So not only are those various interfaces interacting back with that learning record store to say when people have opened, launched, completed content, but we're also taking data from the content itself to understand what people are doing in the content. And we're doing a round trip from this as well. So what we're actually sending back is information back from the learning record store back to those interfaces to say when content has been completed or when those badging paths have been met. And that can become incredibly complex because you can be going back through huge amounts of data to understand whether or not someone has met the requirements of one of those rule sets for one of those awards. So we're talking about thousands and thousands of rule sets with an awful lot of data. And of course, it also needs to go to business intelligence because we need to do reporting. And we started to introduce elements of automation here. So given that people are going on particular journeys and maybe getting stuck at particular points or maybe not doing as well as we thought they would through the content, we're nudging them to new content or enrolling them in new experiences based on that. Of course, all of this also had to be retained for 10 years in terms of the data that we're working with here. So this is a heck of a thing, is what I'm trying to get over to you. This is a heck of a project. Think about the timeline we went through to deploy this. So we started in August 21, about a year ago. We started this project and we went towards a go live in January at the start of 22. So this kind of sprint over the fall last year is where we saw the bulk of the work going here. And not only did we have to get 850,000 users on, we also had to have all of the historical records, which were not necessarily in an xAPI format. So we had to convert everything that they'd seen historically into xAPI. I've now got xAPI statements here that go back to 1970, which is when they've got a learning record for somebody who is still with the organization today, but was trained in 1970. Now we've got an xAPI statement for what that is. So we've got a single source of truth in a single format that's queryable across all of those interfaces to see whether or not you've met the standards and how you've done that. And it's reportable. We rolled it out market by market. So even though we had the brands, we also subsected it into different geographies around the world, looking to do those historical completions, get all of the data accurate in the learning record store, synced up with the LXP, market by market. And then, of course, by the time we've done the historical upload and we go live, there's a delta to be done between those two. So we have to go back and do that. And we rolled that out through September and October and November, market by market, getting up to speed there. So huge amount of work to go live on the 1st of January as we started to switch across. And that was a crucial moment because the old ecosystem was going away. So we had to hit the live date in order to do it. Talk to you about the scale of data, because this is really the point of my chat to you today. It's about lessons in scale, where we saw things like xAPI and a learning record store, even one that we made ourselves, fall over or need to be optimized in some way to work at this sort of global scale. This is a count going from bottom of the page to top of the page of the amount of data that we were storing. So if you go back to when we first started deploying back in August, September, we had somewhere in the region of 30 to 50 million xAPI statements as we started to get there. And then as we started to do those historical loads, we saw it go up more and more. By the time we got to January going live, we had more than 200 million records. Back in June, just a couple of months ago, that was 600 million records, and we're increasing by 100 million a month. This is a serious amount of data that we're now talking about coming into a learning record store. And it's not uncommon to see us generate in excess of 30 million statements every week. It's a huge amount of data. Give you an idea of what that looks like on a disk or something like that. The storage on the learning record store itself has gone up to over 1 terabyte of data, with more than 800 million objects in the database, of which statements making up that 600 million of that. So look, it got really big, and it continues to be big because these guys need this record for 10 years. So this is a huge undertaking to not only have it in this format, but to go for that long. So hang on, I just got a message from Karen. So just checking in on that. There are a few questions. So I'm going to stop and go into a few questions as Karen's given me a good prompt. So I'll talk about where we got to on it here. You can see me on the success page at that point, but let me go through and see if I can scroll over. Apologies, my first time using AirMe. Where does one go for questions?
There's some Q&A there, Ben. Maybe I'll just read them to you. So one of the questions is, you have had to create a custom CMS to store learning data on an LRS ? Is that correct?
No. So you've had to create a custom CMS to store data on the LRS. No. So we have a standard platform, a learning experience platform called Stream. It works natively with Learning Locker, with the Stream Data Cloud, as we'd call it. So those two interact seamlessly in terms of, Stream, the learning experience platform, creates xAPI data. It also launches content, both SCORM and xAPI. Even if we launch SCORM content, we convert the output to xAPI. So everything is in a single format at that point. So we can take a normal SCORM package, launch it, pass it, fail it as you would, but it's actually xAPI data that we're storing on the back end of that. In terms of creating a custom CMS, so the LXP is where we have learning experiences. That's where we have content in all of its different forms. Some of the brands have made their own front ends to that, so you don't have to use the LXP to serve it up. Obviously, the LXP has a beautiful user interface, but some folks have a mobile app, for example, that they deliver everything in the store to the mobile app, and learning might just be one tab of what it is they actually deliver on that app. So it could be one app that runs your whole employee experience, of which learning is a tab. And so in that case, they're pulling on our learning experience platform for the content, and then pulling on the learning record store for the data. So it's a combination of different API calls they would make to understand, okay, what has somebody completed and what do they need to do next, and how can I serve that up? So in that way, there is some element of custom here, not created by my company. It's created by other companies in the ecosystem, which are from around the world. But we haven't created a custom CMS per se, and the learning data is all just stored directly into the learning record store. So David, do come back to me if that didn't make sense, or I can clarify further. I found them now, Karen, so I've got them there. So David, you also had another question about one LRS or multiple. So it's Learning Locker is a multi-tenant system. So we have one installation of Learning Locker, but within it we have logically segregated LRSs for sometimes it's for the different brands, sometimes it's for other purposes that are there. So brands will be able to potentially get access to only their data because it's been segregated, but someone who's in the parent can get access across all of that data. So one installation, but multiple LRSs. I think there's probably like 10 or 12 or something like that in it there. David Fox, how many people were part of the launch team? What was the breakdown of developers, content creators? So difficult to say, David. Large numbers of people here. So we have a team of developers on our side. We employ about 100 engineers. Not all of them would have worked on this project. Not all of them would have been involved in that, but there would have been a core team of probably 5 or 6 who were working specifically around the learning record store, the ETL, the loading process of getting data in here. Content creators, there are tens, if not hundreds of those that exist on the client side. And so we work with independent teams around it. So tremendously complex project. On my side, we had a range of engineers who some were on the LXP, some were on the LRS, some were just doing data, some were doing infrastructure, large number of infrastructure people as well. So a significant undertaking, frankly, to get this done. How did you launch and play LXP xAPI content from mobile? Well, there's two different answers there. Sometimes it would be from a browser, so it would just be in the same browser experience as you'd have through any normal browser at that point. So Stream, our LXP, can natively launch xAPI content and then play that back. On a mobile, there's two options. Either you can use our app, which has the capability to download and then resync with the LRS if you're doing something offline. Some of the other interfaces have their own ways of doing that. I'm not privy to how those other interfaces work, but it's not uncommon to see folks doing that. So either natively or via the browser, they can do that there. What are the hardware requirements to store the LRS, says David? Well, large. At that point, I'll talk to that in a moment if I might, David, because I'll get into some of that in terms of where we ended up going into here. I'll pause for a moment. I'll come back to come back to questions in a moment. So thank you. Do keep them coming. Good questions. Thank you. In terms of where we got to, so I'd be sad if I came to you and said project was a failure. We didn't do it. We did. It was successful. We met the goals that we set at the start of the program. And actually the amount of data we were dealing with at the end was significantly more than we thought we would be. So 400 million completions, 1 billion records or more being stored every year. One of the things that we managed to improve as well was the sort of time to reporting. So previously, under the previous system, it wasn't uncommon for the client to have to wait up to a couple of days for data to appear, which can be a real problem if someone needs to be credentialed to work in your restaurant today and we can't see their updated training profile for 48 hours. That's a problem. That's a significant problem in terms of how the business operates. So we were able to get that up mostly to real time, but even when you're pulling on a fire hose of huge amounts of content, then that is generally only a 1 hour wait. So most of the very large scale reporting at that sort of billion sort of user is no more than an hour behind real time, which was a real significant improvement on where we got it from. Let me talk to you about some of the issues, and I can talk to some of the scale things there, David. So one of the problems that we faced was delays in what we call statement forwarding. One of the capabilities in Learning Locker is you can set up a rule that says when this xAPI statement is seen in the Learning Record Store, forward it onto another endpoint. And that can be really useful for some kind of if this, then that type functionality. So we'll wait for somebody and an actor to have done this activity with this result, and when that occurs, trigger this other thing. And that could be make Slack say, well done, you passed the course. Or it could be fetching back to the learning experience platform or one of those apps and saying, hey, Ben's completed the content. And that's one of the round trips that can be done in that launching of xAPI content. So if I launch the content in Stream, what it's actually doing is for every piece of content there's a rule that's being created to say, hey, when this piece of content gives you this rule, statement forward it back to the LXP to say, that's been completed. That allows us to do some cool stuff in terms of the interface of the LXP, because it doesn't just mean we've got this pass-fail thing going on. We can specifically advance you or otherwise put you down a different path based on the detail of an xAPI statement. So it doesn't have to be passed or failed. It could be attempted. It could be any other verb you could think of in there. And it could be something within the context of that statement that triggers something different to happen. So if someone's got a good pass or a poor pass or a failure with a particular score or something like that, we can do a different activity. So that statement forwarding rule is quite clever, quite nuanced, but creates huge load because there can be 30 million of these coming in every week. There's a huge amount of load there that's being created in terms of that round trip back to the platforms that request it. So changing that into more of a push and pull sort of scenario is where we need to get to. We come up with huge issues of data blocking when we had to do those historical loads. So when we were bringing in big batches of old data and still trying to run beta clients at the same time. So for example, in October, we had all of the September folk were live on the system, and then we had to bulk upload October. That created huge amounts of blocking around the place while the system processed through all of the statements and got to grips with things. So that meant that our system wasn't decoupled enough. Those statement forwards weren't decoupled enough from some of the other ingestion that we had to do. So we had to do some re-engineering here to make sure that one process on the learning record store would not block another. And those delay issues mounted up to the point where we are throwing hardware at the problem. So to the question, David, at one point we were running 620 Amazon EC2 instances to make this work. 620. And EC2 is just one component of what could have been, a vastly more complicated system architecture. Now, obviously, that's not sustainable. Well, it's not for me. So there's a bit of re-engineering to be done here, and there's a bit of thinking about how we've done things differently to get that. So some of these screenshots here showing, occasionally we were getting an 11-minute round trip or something, which is obviously an unacceptable delay in terms of triggering that next action or activity, and seeing huge variations in terms of network latency time. Now, we re-engineered a lot and got those sort of things down. So by decoupling some of these processors, reducing some of the data processing that we're doing, some of the transfers that we were doing around the place, we've managed to flatline that transfer graph down to a bare minimum. And actually, the oldest message in this screen is 7 seconds. So that's thinking that that's actually the oldest in the stack now in terms of the biggest delay anyone experienced was 7 seconds. We think is entirely within the bounds of acceptability, and most things are basically instant. So we've done an awful lot of re-engineering to make this work and to make it work at a scale that is sustainable over time. But we've been thinking a lot about. There's a question here in terms of thinking about Charlotte. You asked, moving forward, are they going to be tracking more than completions? So yeah, to begin with, it really is about completions, but actually the nuance of where the client wanted to get to, and one of the things they're excited about by using the Experience API was being able to unlock more than completions. Completions was kind of the table stakes of what needed to be done here. But with that on lockdown, then we can get into much more detail in terms of how it is people are progressing through these journeys, what it is they're getting stuck on, and how we might optimize the onboarding process. Onboarding is a huge deal for this organization. They take in an awful lot of people every few months into the organization. So if they can make that more efficient, more effective as a process, then they're really keen to do that. I'll talk a bit about how we're getting into that in a moment, but that's absolutely it. The trouble is, Charlotte, is that one of the things we've hit at this scale is this trade-off between data that we'd like to have and the amount of load that it's putting on things. So we've gone back actually, and we've actually created a different mode in our LXP now, which is kind of a light xAPI data versus heavy xAPI data, because we would track everything. By default, our sort of thoughts and feelings are, yeah, I want to know when someone logs on. I want to know when someone opens, when somebody initializes something, when somebody comments, when somebody does X, Y, Z. I want to know all these things because I think these could be a useful observation later down the line when I come to do some analytics. But frankly, at this scale, we can't afford to do that all the time. It becomes a real dollar cost of processing this much data, a huge dollar cost, I might add, to doing that. So actually, there is a piece here where we've gone back to the system and re-engineered the LXP to sort of say, look, these are the essential statements that people would probably need in order to meet most of their use cases, thinking about opens and completions. But then there's this extended set of stuff that you can do through the platform. And you can toggle that on or off now at an admin setting, because frankly, getting all the data is painful when it's done at this scale. We've also had to think about the robustness of those xAPI statements, because generally speaking, you're putting in some context and things like that. You're probably generating a string of text or an object that's about 2 kilobytes in size. But when you start adding that up to 1 billion of them, it becomes huge. So actually cutting out redundant parts of statements or bits that we could do without was significant for us as well. So really being tight on not only the data that we were sending, but also within each of those statements, what it was we were sending. Do we have real purpose for it? Do we really understand what it is we're going to do with this data? We can always go back and add more if we find there's a gap, but there is obviously a trade-off there. If it's historical and it's gone, it's gone. So that's a difficult decision. Getting the data architecture right around what it is you really absolutely need, what you might need, is a tricky one. I'd have spent more time there if we'd have had it in this process. And I think that's where I'd encourage folks to think about when you're getting into scale. To begin with, when you're experimenting, it's wonderful just to see data flow. It's like a miracle. Everything's great. But then when you actually get it to flow, sometimes you can't stop. And all of a sudden you end up with, an impressive looking number in terms of how many objects or how many statements you've collated. But the question is, so what? And how much is it costing you? Because when that AWS bill lands, you start to question the world's existence a little bit at that point. I'm just going to come back to the questions for a moment. Charlotte, thank you for your question. James, I think I probably did just answer your question there. At smaller scales, would you still recommend capturing as much data as possible? So, no, I wouldn't. And I think, but it depends on your lens of what it is you want to do. So, if I'm looking at an analytics use case where I'm trying to find out a reason, where I'm trying to prove or disprove a hypothesis about why this learning works, or how this learning has some impact on my business or whatever it is you're running as an education program, then I think I'd try and be much more deliberate about it. So we tend to fall into this sort of inductive reasoning. We collect all of the data and then we try and spot patterns. And then using those patterns, we sort of say, oh, well, this must be the way the world works. Everybody logs on a Tuesday because I can see it on this graph. But that can lead you into some logical fallacies and can lead you down some sort of alleys that are not true. A preferable approach would be to state a hypothesis to begin with. So at part of your experiment stage, think about this as you work in your groups. Perhaps if you're working on something that's around analytics, think about something that you want to prove, or if you're really scientific, something you want to disprove with a hypothesis. And then try and work back to what is the minimal information you would need to observe in order to prove, disprove your hypothesis. Instead of collecting everything and imagining you're going to get a pattern or you're going to get that I think leads to mistakes. Going the other way around and being really deliberate about it, if you're doing the analytics use case, I certainly would. My exceptions to that, and there always are exceptions, are sometimes you're doing automation use cases rather than analytics, i.e., I need lots of different trigger events because those different trigger events could have different impacts on what people do. If people log on here or do this or do that movement, it may be different depending on the use case we've got here. And we are certainly doing some automation here. So that kind of crosses the boundaries a bit. Good question, James. Thank you. Do keep questions coming in. I'll keep talking for a moment. I've got a couple more slides to go. Let me just fast forward you into how we at Learning Pool use a learning record store today and how our thinking has evolved. So when we launched Learning Locker, I'm going to say it was 2014, but I might be wrong. We spent huge amounts of time, and not just in 2014, in every year subsequent, thinking about how we were going to visualize data and give you those dashboards, those real actionable dashboards in the product. But over time, the world has moved on, or at least it has for us. And we're starting to see that business intelligence tools are becoming more commoditized, more ubiquitous, especially in learning. So it's not uncommon to see people shipping with a license for Tableau or an integration with Power BI. Learning Pool itself, we have a white label integration with a platform called Sisense, which is a predictive business intelligence tool. So you wouldn't know you were using Sisense, but if you buy our products, you're using Sisense behind the scenes. So you don't have to license it. It's just part of buying Stream. But we're using a business intelligence tool for our insights layer. Frankly, our ability as a smaller learning organization to keep up with the pace of what teams at Amazon, Microsoft, or wherever have been doing is totally outstripped and inadequate. So our capabilities are really in our ability to understand learning, our ability to understand the xAPI data and things like that. So we can use other people's resources to build models to show you insights on what it is that you're likely to want to see. But the value in us developing the best visualization interface in the world has kind of slipped away from us over the years. So whilst you can absolutely build widgets, embed dashboards and visualize things in Learning Locker today, you absolutely can. It is not really what we're thinking is the core use case. Today, we come to see it as the data manager. So this role in terms of being able to segregate data between different learning record stores, to have many different roles with lots of different access levels, to provide great fast access to APIs that scale, to be able to do things like statement forwarding and what we call journeys, which are sets of rules that can be adhered to in order to trigger some other event. We see these sorts of things as being the heart of what a learning record store means to us today. And equally, we also think it means giving access to deeper layers of data. So whilst our interface is one, increasingly we work with global organizations that want more refined access to raw data. Some of them just want the raw data. Give me everything out of that database in a fire hose and we will put it into our systems. So this client actually has 19 connections into the database layer through a sort of fire hose connection that we give them, because they just want to consume it in all of the systems and in all of the products that they have that run their business. We also present what we call a refined layer, which is more for data analysts, data scientists to look at. So it gives you a kind of SQL-like capability to query the data based on what it is we think you're going to need. So we're starting to think about this much more at the data management level from a learning record store. Others will have different viewpoints on that. I don't think they're invalid at all. I just think from my business and the decisions we've taken, frankly, not really plausible to keep up with the pace of development of business intelligence tools, which are increasingly available, increasingly ubiquitous. But where we really add value is being able to extract what a good learning dashboard might look like from that and present it so it's clickable and it's instant and all the rest of it, or being able to present that data to scientists or to modelers further down the line. So we've really changed an awful lot over time here in terms of our conception of what we think about when we think about the learning record store. For us, very few people would log on to the learning record store. And certainly, whilst this customer in particular has hundreds of administrators, only a handful of them would ever log on to the learning locker. And even then, they probably wouldn't use it very much. One screen, just to give you an idea of what's next there. So this plays back to Charlotte's question in terms of, what else could you do other completion? So this is another tool that we make called Stream Automation. It's a zoomed out screenshot, so it's hard to see. But I'm really interested in using this data as part of an if this, then that sort of sequence. So when we see this data coming in from the learning locker, then take you down this path. And if the statement is this, go this way. And if the statement is this, go this way. This is really capable of creating some unique journeys based on data, starting to spin stuff out and being able to do some real personalization based on the granularity of that data. This stuff really excites me. I think this is a really good path forward for us to think about how we make it kind of one size fits one when it comes to personalization. So I don't think you should get hung up on xAPI being the sort of master key to learning analytics. I think there's an awful lot more to that. Will involve data that's not just xAPI data. It'll be from an LXP and for other systems and things like that. And the BI tool is a great place to put all of that. You don't want to get into the business of putting non-xAPI data, kind of munging it into a learning record store. That way madness lies. But this is also another really cool angle. Getting into this automation stuff, getting into this, what can I do differently? Or better than that, what can the system automate and prescribe for you to do differently given the data we've seen? This is the level that we're starting to get to. And this excites me because I think this extends our ability as learning professionals or administrators to do things without having to do it. Program the system, let it be there, and the system will take care of that personalization for you. And that to me is incredibly exciting. So I'm going to come back and answer some questions there. We have a download available if you want to find out more about how we use xAPI and some of our systems to demonstrate the business value of L&D. So do visit our website, learningpool.com. Do visit the website anyway to take a look at some of the other case studies that we've got. I hope to be able to speak more about this particular case study at DevLearn later in the year and a few other things that we've got there. We will be at DevLearn amongst other conferences if you want to come see us. I will flick back to the questions. Do keep them coming in. And as we start to move away, I think the session's running for 45. So if the questions take us that long, great. If not, then you have the group tables available to you as part of the cohort. David Kelly will be hosting one, presuming he's emerged back. Thinking about DevLearn there. So do keep the questions coming in. Let me see what else I got here. So here we go. Charlotte, the company's other HR systems to update into the LOS time off demographics. So no, this is, and maybe I answered your question already, Charlotte, but this is exactly where we don't go with the learning record store. So the learning record store is built for xAPI. We use it for xAPI. Historically, we have done stuff where we started dumping non-xAPI data in there in terms of, we could turn that into an xAPI statement. I could turn some of that data into that. But increasingly, we get into this, I showed you the graphs in terms of like the cost of data transfer and things like that. cost yourself huge amounts of money, take an awful lot of time to just kind of change data from one format to another. Doesn't really add value in our experience. And so actually what we're actually doing there is using that business intelligence layer to combine that back together. So the BI tool might pull from the learning record store, but it also might pull from the user provisioning, which is where all of that HR data is stored, or thinking about scheduling as a software or something like that that might be in the store. That could all be done back in one of those fire hose areas where they're pulling off the learning record store data and then cutting it against the schedule, the time off data or something like that to create. So that was an angle that we pursued for a while in terms of, hey, what if we put this in the learning record store? We could visualize it, we could do interesting things with it. But we've now changed our tack to be much purer around the learning record store is for xAPI data. And there are other systems that are better at aggregating, better places for us to aggregate, not just from this, but from others. So we've come full circle on that. David, apologies if this is a stupid question. I bet it's not, David. I bet it's not. Trying to get a head around all of this and the new acronyms. You're using huge LMS to train users. The LMS is sending data to an LOS via xAPI. So it's not quite different acronyms in different places. Not what we'd call a traditional LMS, but yeah, there is a learning management type system at the heart of this. But there are also several other systems as well. So the LMS is one place where you could be doing it, but you could also be doing activity on a mobile device or on a range of other portal-like interfaces that are there. Also, the content itself could be sending data. So whilst I could be getting the open from the LMS, then open this object. Once the object is initialized, then that content can be flowing. So Rise will be sending xAPI data directly to the learning record store in terms of how that's working through that there. So there can be many sources of data. I wouldn't like to say how many sources we have, but it will be hundreds of sources of data that will get into that. All of it's being put into the learning record store, and then all of it's made available for reporting. So it doesn't matter whether you accessed it on one device or one interface or another. It doesn't matter if I'm pulling on data that came from the content or came from the platform itself. It's all Experience API, and it's all in one format. So going back historically 40 years, it's all in that one queryable format that we can go out there. There are lots of native reports that are just here already, but there's lots more we can do with the learning record store in terms of that detail of what it is people are doing at the granular level. Everything else tends to be quite high level. We've got like a whole bunch of new questions came in. So thank you, Martin. In stream automation, what level does the if then that work? I.e. course level, if learner completes course A, then allow learner to take course B, or within course or unit. So quiz 1, then A. So typically, Martin, would work at the course level. So if learner completes course A, then take course B. I guess you could go at the answer and quiz level. We do have that kind of logic within the authoring tools already. They tend to be self-contained and not need to phone out to the learning record store. It might also limit us in some offline capabilities if those packages weren't natively able to kind of be completed as a package that could be deployed as one in one kind of downloader in one kind of place. The latter though, if grade on quiz 1 is 70%, then get badge, then yeah, you absolutely can do that. So it could be that actually what we have is a journey. You need to do course A, course B, course C, or within those you need to answer question A, B, C, D, E, or split that across 2 different quizzes. So the result of the badge is actually the result of input from this or this and this. And you get into some quite complex equivalencies there to say, okay, this credential can be awarded if somebody does this one thing or if they do these 10 things. And those 2 things are the equivalent and they get to the same outcome. But you can write those rules into the learning record store that does that in some interesting ways. So there's lots of possibilities once you get to that more granular level of data. Marilyn, is there a way to get access to the ebook if you only have a Gmail account? It says need business email. Beyond my pay grade, I'm afraid that's the website. So maybe shoot me an email or hit me on LinkedIn and I'll see if I can get you a copy. LinkedIn's probably best. You'll find me. I'm the most handsome Ben Betts on LinkedIn, I think. James, have you had any luck injecting xAPI statements into third-party applications in order to get data into your LOS? So let me reread that, James, because you may be going beyond my level of capability. Have you had any luck injecting xAPI statements into third-party applications in order to get data into your LRS. Don't think so. In that, I'd probably need more data or more intel on that to get to the question, James. But you know, we could certainly proxy things. So if somebody is already outputting something to a log, be it a SCORM or something else like that, can we write something that would pick up on that and then augment it or otherwise modify that into an xAPI call and give it the right context and other things we wanted to do that, and insert that into the LRS? Yeah, we can do that. That's kind of what we do with SCORM. So SCORM is obviously SCORM. It's sending out regular CMI type interactions. What we're doing is we're picking up on those, kind of intercepting them, putting around them the context that we know about where that object is, given where it's been launched from and things like that, and then sending that to the learning record store for storage. So that might not be quite the case you're getting at, James, but maybe is the answer. You come back to me. You said Stream can play SCORM. Any plans for launching and playing CMI? Yeah, I think we do in a few occasions, actually, Martin. I'll have to check that already. We have a bunch of different activity types, and I'm relatively sure I've seen CMI5 stuff go in, but maybe hit me up on LinkedIn again, Martin, on that, and I'll come back to you in terms of that. I need to clarify. David, one last one. Maybe a better way to think about it is the learner opens an object, and that object uses xAPI to send records to the LRS. Yeah, that's a really good way to think about it, David. Folks, we're coming up towards the 45 minutes. I can stick around for another one or two if you've got any more. Otherwise, I can flick back to Karen.
Yeah, and I will bring David Kelly on the stage with us. He is here, so he'll be coming on the stage, and he has some information to share with us about DevLearn xAPI. So David, when you completely join us, you'll give us that information on DevLearn.
Hello, everybody. Sorry about that. And bringing me out onto the stage sounded way more dramatic than I think was necessary. But I appreciate that's the technical term of it. Sorry about the Ben. Sorry about leaving you off stage at the start of that unexpectedly. Had a small technical glitch there. But thank you all for being here. First and foremost, Ben, thank you so much for sharing with us. We wanted to start early in the cohort with a case study that showed people this in practice, and you've given the group a lot to think about. So thank you for that. And as Karen mentioned, I just wanted to share a couple of things with you around some of the stuff that you can expect at DevLearn related to xAPI as we complete this week's second week of the cohort. First off, we have if you want to take a deeper dive, we have the xAPI Accelerator Certificate Program, a 2-day deep dive into putting xAPI into practice, led by Jeff Batt. That will be taking place on Sunday and Monday, October 23rd and 24th. And we also have the xAPI User Conference, which is taking shape. A lot of great sessions going on there, including xAPI Hyperdrive, which is going to be a lot of case studies where people are going to share what they're doing, and we'll be giving prizes to the best implementations of xAPI. So if you want to join us for the User Conference, that'll be Tuesday, October 25th. Again, the day before DevLearn starts in Las Vegas. If you want to learn more about either one of those things, I'll be setting up a table in AirMeet after the session. Anyone has any questions, you can join me there. Happy to talk about it. And if you haven't already done so, make sure you do join the Learning Guild. Once you log in there and you check out everything that's there, you can find a host of additional resources that you can use to explore xAPI further, including our latest research report from Megan Torrance explaining the current state of adoption on xAPI. So just a couple of things. Again, if you have any questions on any of these things, I will be at one of the tables after this session. Happy to answer any questions you want. But I will close the session by thanking you, Ben, for sharing your story with us here today, and thanking all of you for being here and being a part of the cohort.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the session now, but feel free to be at the tables.